The morning Eli Hartley signed the deed to his dream farm, the sky was silent, the fields were golden, and not a single neighbor was in sight. After 10 years of city noise and corporate burnout, he finally had peace. Or so he thought. 3 weeks later, a moving truck rolled up to the property line where the farmland met the edge of Roseglen Estates, an uptight beige HOA neighborhood, infamous for its obsession with rules. Eli kept his distance. He had no intention of mixing with HOA politics. His boundary fence was legal, his livestock permit laminated and framed, and his business, Hartley Harvests, was thriving online. Then came the Parrot. Eli first heard it at dawn. A screech like metal being torn apart echoed across the cornfield. Squawk! Get off my land! Eli dropped his hoe and scanned the horizon. No one. Just the sun rising and rows of tomatoes ripening. Code violation! Code violation! It came again. Louder. Closer. Eli followed the sound to his fence and froze. Perched on the back of a lawn chair was a massive green parrot, eyes glinting like mischief itself. It cocked its head, then unleashed a string of what could only be described as HOA catchphrases, mixed with curse words. You call that a shed? HOA says no. Squawk! From behind the bird emerged a woman in a designer visor and pastel tracksuit, hands on hips, like she owned the land, and the air above it, Karen Brewster. The name spread through Roseglen like wildfire in dry brush. Rumor had it she'd sued her last HOA for not enforcing the grass length code. Is that your bird? Eli asked cautiously. That's Captain Pickles, Karen said, smiling like a politician. He's very intelligent. Former therapy bird. Also a certified emotional support animal. And no, he doesn't bite. Much. Captain Pickles let out a sound that somehow mimicked a barking dog, followed by a fire alarm. Eli's goats bleated in panic across the yard. Over the next few days, Eli tried to ignore the racket. He wore headphones, played classical music in the greenhouse, even bought a white noise machine for the chicken coop. But the bird was relentless. It didn't just mimic sounds, it learned. Within a week, Captain Pickles was imitating Eli's own voice, yelling at the animals. The cows stopped responding to commands. The rooster crowed at midnight. Worst of all, the pregnant mare, Daisy, began pacing and sweating from constant startles. Eli worried she'd lose the foal. One night just before 4 a.m., Eli heard a strange crash in the barn. When he rushed out with a flashlight, he found several hay bales toppled, his irrigation timer smashed, and feathers, unmistakable green ones, scattered across the floor. From the rafters, a shadow darted out the back and vanished into the trees. He filed a noise complaint with the HOA. They sent back a form response. Roseglen HOA does not regulate avian behavior. Perhaps install deterrents? It was signed, smugly, by Karen Brewster, HOA Vice President. Eli's hands clenched. She was on the board. The next morning, his gate was open. A dozen hens had wandered out. His prized lettuce row was shredded, trampled by panicked goats that had clearly been spooked. A single green feather fluttered on the broken fence post. Captain Pickles had declared war, and Eli was now fighting an enemy that could fly, mimic voices, and manipulate an entire HOA. But Eli wasn't giving up. He had a plan, and it started with catching the parrot in the act. Eli stood by the gate at sunrise, arms crossed, watching the hens straggle back through the broken fence. The ground was a mess of claw prints, scattered feed, and feathers that shimmered green in the morning light. He wasn't sure what burned more, the destruction or the HOA's smug dismissal. avian behavior, they called it. But to Eli, it was sabotage. Organized, intelligent sabotage. Captain Pickles wasn't just a noisy nuisance. The parrot had turned his peaceful farm into a war zone. Every day since the bird arrived, something had gone wrong. Now it wasn't just about noise. It was property damage, animal distress, losses. And Karen. She played innocent. She waved across the fence with her manicured fingers and a cup that read, "Ho boss." Her parrot sat smugly on her shoulder, eyes sharp as razors. If you didn't know better, you'd think the bird was grinning. That afternoon, Eli tried to repair the fence while keeping a wary eye on the sky. He heard a flutter and ducked. A burst of feathers rained down, followed by a scream that mimicked his own voice. "Daisy! Stop kicking!" He spun around. Captain Pickles soared low across the field, heading straight for the stables. Eli dropped his tools and ran. Too late. The mare had kicked open her stall. She was panicked, snorting wildly, and had slipped on scattered hay. Eli rushed in, calming her as best he could. A long scratch ran down her flank. Not deep, but enough to make his blood boil. Outside the barn, the parrot circled triumphantly, then vanished again over the HOA fence line. Eli slammed the barn door. That was it. No more waiting. He installed motion-triggered cameras around the property. Every entrance, every coop, every shed. He placed them low, mid, and high. The next time Captain Pickles set one claw over the line, Eli would have the proof. But proof didn't come easy. Over the next week, Captain Pickles became more evasive, like it knew it was being watched. It struck at odd hours. It led a flock of wild crows to scatter compost all over the lettuce beds. It mimicked the bleat of a distressed goat to lure Eli out of bed. And once, at 3:12 a.m., it triggered the barn's lights and screamed, "Intruder! Alert! Call the HOA!" nearly giving Eli a heart attack. The real turning point came Friday morning. Eli's niece Abby was visiting to help harvest squash for the weekend market. She just reached the end of the field when she screamed. Eli sprinted over, heart hammering. There, sitting like a smug sentinel atop the tractor steering wheel, was Captain Pickles. Chewing through the ignition wires with its curved beak, the dashboard was torn open, insulation scattered everywhere. The bird looked up at Eli, gave a long deliberate squawk, and said in perfect imitation of Karen's voice, "Should have read the bylaws." Abby, still filming with her phone, whispered, "Oh my God, I got all of it." Eli didn't say a word. He just looked at the bird, then at the camera, then at the wrecked tractor. Later that night, he emailed the footage to the HOA board with a formal letter of demand, not just for the tractor repairs, but for the livestock disruption, crop, losses, and emotional damages to his business. Karen responded within 10 minutes. Her reply, "Captain Pickles is an independent bird. Your farm's chaos is not our concern. Stop harassing the HOA, or we'll file a cease and desist." Eli stared at the email, jaw clenched. The war had gone official, and now he had evidence. He wasn't going down, not without taking the whole HOA board with him. The footage of Captain Pickles, gnawing through Eli's tractor wiring, should have been the end of it. Eli had thought, foolishly, that the HOA would fold under the weight of undeniable evidence. Instead, they doubled down. The HOA's official response claimed the video was edited, accused Eli of provoking the bird, and dismissed his demand for damages as an attempt to harass a respected board member. Worse, the footage mysteriously vanished from the HOA's internal servers. Someone on the inside had scrubbed it clean. Eli knew then this wasn't just Karen's doing. The entire board was protecting her and her flying menace. That week, things took a darker turn. Captain Pickles began appearing with backup. It started with a single crow, then 3, then a dozen. They weren't just flying in formation. They were following commands. The parrot would screech, and the crows would descend like missiles onto Eli's fields, tearing up mulch, scattering seeds, and even dive-bombing his scarecrow until it collapsed in tatters. "Are you kidding me?" Eli muttered one afternoon as he watched the avian ambush from the window of his greenhouse. The birds weren't random. They were tactical. Eli tried netting his most vulnerable plants, but the crows ripped holes through it. He put out reflective deterrents, only to find them pecked off or carried away entirely. Captain Pickles, meanwhile, perched just beyond reach on a high post near the property line, as if supervising an airstrike. By now, Eli's animals were jumpy, his farmhands wary, and his online customers were emailing about missed orders and shipping delays. The chaos was taking its toll, not just on his crops, but on his reputation. That night, Eli made a decision. It was time to set a trap. He didn't want to harm the bird, though the thought crossed his mind more than once. But he needed hard, irrefutable proof of malicious intent. The courts wouldn't believe stories about avian gangs, but they would believe surveillance. Real, multi-angle surveillance. He called Abby and a friend who worked with drones. By morning, 3 discrete motion-activated cameras had been hidden throughout the fields, and a drone equipped with zoom lenses hovered silently in a barn loft. They tracked the bird's behavior from the air and the ground, 24/7. It didn't take long. On day 2, at exactly 6:42 a.m., the drone caught Captain Pickles leading a formation of 9 crows straight into the tomato greenhouse. The parrot mimicked the sound of Eli's voice. "Here, boys, feed time," causing the goats nearby to stampede toward the greenhouse wall. The fence gave way. Chaos erupted. The drone recorded every second, from the bird's screech to the shattering glass panels and trampled seedlings. Eli didn't even bother watching the rest before sending the footage to his lawyer. The same afternoon, he printed screenshots and brought them to the HOA office. He slammed the envelope on the counter. "This bird isn't an emotional support animal. It's an orchestrator of property destruction, and if you don't put a stop to it, I will, legally." Karen's smug grin never faded. She leaned over the counter and said, "Captain Pickles is part of my family. Any attempt to remove him will be seen as a threat." Then she tapped a paper on the wall, a framed notice that read, "Section 7B, all emotional support animals are protected under HOA non-discrimination policy." Eli walked out without another word. Later that night, as he replayed the footage with Abby, the drone caught one more thing: a brief image of Karen on her back porch, tossing bread into the air, calling to the crows. She wasn't just protecting the parrot, she was feeding the entire flock. Saturday morning should have been Eli's biggest payday of the season. He and Abby had prepped for it all week. Crates of heirloom squash, bushels of cherry tomatoes, hand-picked herbs bundled in twine. Everything set for the county farmers market. Orders had already poured in online. Customers were expecting fresh produce and pick up at dawn. Instead, he woke up to feathers and carnage. The field behind his greenhouse looked like a war zone. Crushed vegetables, claw marks in the soil, and rows of squash snapped in half. A trail of green feathers led from the barn to the market crates, where a dozen eggs had been launched like grenades into produce baskets. Straw was everywhere. One crate had a note, pecked into it, barely legible. "Squawk! The HOA owns the sky. Abby's phone was already out. She filmed the mess in stunned silence. That bird vandalized your product, she whispered. And the HOA, their accessories. But Eli didn't speak. He was staring at the one thing that made his blood run cold. Daisy's stall door was wide open again. The mare was pacing anxiously inside the barn. Visibly shaken, in her water trough floated a single green feather, soaked and heavy. This wasn't just about crops anymore. It was about safety. His animals, and his properties. Later that day, Eli stood in front of the HOA building, still wearing his dirt-stained flannel, holding up a printed photo of Captain Pickles, mid-dive, flanked by crows. Abby stood beside him with a laptop, playing the drone footage. Behind them, 6 broken crates of ruined vegetables. A small crowd of curious residents gathered. Some smirked. Others whispered. Eli raised his voice. This bird has caused over $20,000 in damage to my property. You all know it. You've seen it flying into yards, mimicking alarms, traumatizing my animals, destroying fences, and leading coordinated attacks. Karen appeared at the HOA office door, arms crossed. This is harassment, she said loudly. You're disturbing the peace of our community. Really, Abby said, raising the volume on the drone video. The screech of Captain Pickles echoed through the crowd, followed by footage of the greenhouse destruction and the Parrot dive bombing the squash stand. Gasps broke out. Phones came up. I've submitted 3 formal complaints. Eli continued. They vanished. Now I'm here. Not because I want trouble, but because I want justice. If this HOA won't stop protecting a rogue bird, I'll take it to county court. And believe me, I have the footage, the witnesses, and now, he held up a legal folder. A lawyer. Karen's face flushed red. You think a court's going to waste time on a parrot? She scoffed. Captain Pickles is a registered support animal. Any harm that comes to him will result in federal charges. You're playing a dangerous game. Good, Eli said, because it's time someone else saw how the HOA's playing it. He uploaded the video from Abby's laptop to every social media platform they could find, tagging local news, county animal control, and even a few viral justice channels known for exposing HOA abuse. Within minutes, views exploded. By the end of the day, Action Picklegate was trending. Support poured in from animal rights activists, farmers, and annoyed neighbors who had stories of their own. About Karen, the parrot, and the HOA's selective enforcement, the HOA issued a weak statement. We are investigating reports of unusual bird activity. All support animals remain protected under current regulations. But it was too late. Eli had set the internet ablaze, and the world was watching. And somewhere in the distance, Captain Pickles watched too, perched atop the HOA sign, head tilted, calculating. By Monday, Eli's quiet farm had turned into a media circus. News vans lined the road like mushrooms after rain. A local anchor dubbed it the War of the Wings. Reporters camped outside the HOA building. Everyone wanted a soundbite from the rogue farmer feuding with a parrot. But what they got was far more than a quirky headline. The video footage Abby posted had struck a nerve, not just because of the destruction, but because of what it revealed. The arrogance of power, the blind protection of bad behavior, and the absurd lengths to which an HOA would go to shield one of its own. Eli gave measured interviews. Calm, direct, and factual. He didn't rant. He didn't name-call. He showed the videos, presented the damages, and explained the impact on his animals, his business, and his peace of mind, but not everyone stayed calm. Karen, for one, was unraveling. She emerged from her house mid-morning with Captain Pickles on her shoulder and a folder full of printed character witness statements from HOA members who had never even met Eli. She called the press vultures, claimed the footage was AI generated. She even accused Abby of being part of a social sabotage ring. Captain Pickles, ever faithful, echoed her every word. Fake news. Fake news. Squawk! Lawsuit incoming. The reporters ate it up. But what they really wanted was a reaction from the HOA board. That came later, and it wasn't pretty. During a surprise town meeting called by the HOA president, a nervous dentist named Mr. Fields, who had clearly aged 10 years in 1 week, residents were invited to share their concerns. One by one, neighbors stepped up, and the stories poured out. "I haven't slept in 2 months," one man said. "That bird mimics my burglar alarm. My toddler now screams, 'Citation,' in the middle of the night." Another mother added, teary-eyed. Someone else described how the parrot had flown into their open car window and chewed up their registration forms. Others had footage of Pickles screaming, "HOA rules at their dogs." Eli sat in the back, arms folded. He didn't have to say a word. Karen stood up and tried to defend her bird's honor, calling him a voice for community order. But by then, the tide had turned. Even HOA board members were whispering among themselves, eyeing her like a liability. Then came the twist. Eli's lawyer, Ms. Calderon, sharp, poised, and quick with receipts, walked into the meeting uninvited. She handed the board copies of a cease and desist order, not against Eli, but against the HOA itself. Negligent oversight, denial of documented damage, repeated suppression of official complaints. She listed calmly. "Oh, an aiding and abetting a nuisance animal with destructive tendencies." Karen sputtered. "He's a parrot, not a criminal." Ms. Calderon didn't flinch. "Intent and pattern matter. He may be a parrot, but you, Mrs. Brewster, are the one who trained him to do what no HOA can lawfully condone." The room fell into stunned silence. After the meeting, as cameras followed Karen back to her home, Captain Pickles let out a final defiant screech. "Call my lawyer. HOA rules. Code violation. Code viol. Bam! A pie, tossed from somewhere. Off screen. Hit Karen square in the face. Whipped cream exploded. Reporters gasped. And though Eli didn't throw it, he had to admit, the timing was perfect. Back at the farm that evening, Abby showed him a trending petition. Remove Captain Pickles and Karen from the HOA board for good. Over 50,000 signatures and counting. But Eli wasn't celebrating yet. The fight wasn't over, because the next morning, something new showed up on his land. A notice nailed to his gatepost. Property under HOA review for code compliance violations. Section 12C. Unauthorized structures. Under investigation. It was signed not by Karen, but by a name he hadn't seen before. Someone worse. Someone higher up. The paper nailed to Eli's gate wasn't just another HOA notice. It was a threat, not from Karen this time. Her signature was noticeably absent, but from someone named Gregory L. Templeton, listed as HOA Oversight Consultant. The name was unfamiliar, but the tone was all too familiar. Cold, corporate, and full of veiled menace. Eli didn't wait. He scanned the notice into Abby's laptop and ran a search. Within minutes, a tangled web unfolded on the screen. Gregory Templeton wasn't just an oversight consultant. He was a private contractor, hired by multiple HOAs across the state, known for aggressive legal maneuvers and compliance sweeps that conveniently targeted dissenters. And, most tellingly, He was formerly part of a litigation firm, specializing in silencing whistleblowers through technical violations. They're going scorched earth, Abby said, scrolling through complaints filed against him by other homeowners. This guy's the HOA boogeyman. It all started to make sense. The disappearing footage, the manipulated complaint records, the drone footage missing from HOA servers. It wasn't just Karen's doing. She had protection. Templeton. That evening, as dusk fell, Eli drove past the HOA clubhouse. It was empty, officially closed for maintenance, but one SUV sat parked out back, lights on inside. Eli kept going, but he noted the plate. He had a hunch Templeton was in town, and he didn't like leaving fingerprints. Back at the farm, the crows were quieter than usual. Even Captain Pickles was absent, likely locked up by Karen during the PR firestorm. The silence was eerie, too calm. The next morning, Eli awoke to shouting, "Uncle Eli! The greenhouse! It's happening again!" He bolted outside, barefoot, to find Abby pointing at the sky. Smoke, not thick, not flames, but enough to choke his stomach with dread. Inside the greenhouse, it wasn't fire, it was sabotage. Someone had dumped bags of powdered fertilizer into the irrigation lines and overwatered the entire interior. What should have been rows of thriving greens were now puddles of sludge and rotting roots. The smell was sharp and chemical, and in the center of the carnage, taped to a shovel, Section 12C, unapproved structures, unsafe operations. You were warned. Abby took pictures. Eli didn't speak. He just stared, his fists trembling. He knew what this was. Not a random act, not a rogue bird. This was Templeton's way of saying, "We don't need a bird to bury you." Later that day, Ms. Calderon called with news. The county had received a formal complaint from the HOA, citing Eli's barn, shed, and greenhouse as unapproved commercial operations within residential zones. A hearing had been fast-tracked. 3 days from now, they're trying to bury you in paperwork before the media noise dies down, she said. But we have leverage, real leverage. Eli leaned in. What kind? She paused. Templeton has a record. Years ago, he helped cover up environmental violations at a subdivision built over wetland. I've got a whistleblower who's willing to talk, but we need something bigger, something now, something the public can latch onto before they silence it again. That night, Eli and Abby pored over the drone footage. Hours of it, dozens of files. And just before midnight, they found it, a brief clip from 2 weeks ago, barely 10 seconds, showing Karen on her back porch, not just feeding the birds, but handing what looked like tiny reflective tags to a man in a black windbreaker. Zoom in. Pause. There, clear as day, Gregory Templeton. And the tags, the same ones now worn around the legs of several crows, seen in recent footage. They're tagging the birds, Abby whispered. They're training them. Eli stared at the screen, jaw tight. So it wasn't just a bird war. It was a program. Tuesday morning, the gloves came off. Eli uploaded the new footage to every platform he could think of. The 10-second clip of Karen handing reflective leg tags to Gregory Templeton, the so-called HOA oversight consultant. The birds weren't just scavengers anymore. They were branded, coordinated, weaponized. The caption under the video was simple. You think this is just a parrot? Watch who's training the flock. The post exploded. By noon, 2 news stations had already run with the story. By evening, an independent journalist from a well-known investigative YouTube channel had released a 15-minute breakdown titled HOA Bird sabotage ring. The Templeton program exposed. It had over 1 million views by midnight. Within hours, people came forward. From a gated neighborhood in Willow Bend, a couple shared how their HOA fined them for bird feeders, only for local starlings to start mimicking their doorbell. Every night for 2 months, a retired vet from Eastfield revealed he'd seen similar reflective tags on birds outside his complex after clashing with the HOA there over a compost pile. And then came the real bombshell, a leaked HOA training memo. From an anonymous source. Header, Avian Influence Initiative, Pilot Phase. It detailed a behavioral conditioning experiment to encourage nuisance bird flocks to deter non-compliant resident behaviors. The document included vague legal disclaimers and a list of subdivisions, Rosewood Hills among them. Karen's neighborhood. Eli couldn't believe what he was reading. They weren't just allowing Pickles to run wild. They were studying him. Templeton had apparently turned the bird's mimicry, cunning, and aggression into a model. The HOA had funded it under the guise of non-invasive deterrent strategy trials. And Karen, she was the first field partner. That evening, Eli stood on the same HOA lawn where he'd made his first public appeal. Only this time, the crowd was triple the size. News vans, protesters, local politicians, even a few animal rights advocates wearing shirts that read, "Parrots, deserve peace, not programs." Eli raised a bullhorn. "This was never just about my greenhouse," he said. "It was about abuse, of power, of trust, of nature. You trained a bird to destroy property. And when that wasn't enough, you sent a man to bury me in legal quicksand. But now the truth's out." Abby stepped forward and held up a printed copy of the leaked memo. Karen didn't show up. Templeton did, but not with a smile. He tried to cut through the crowd, holding his own stack of papers, yelling about defamation, illegal drone surveillance, and fabricated evidence. No one listened. A few people booed. One woman threw sunflower seeds at his feet. By the next morning, the county clerk's office announced a full investigation into Rosewood Hills HOA, with special attention on Templeton's consulting contracts and the unexplained funds used to purchase avian tracking devices. Karen's house was dark. Her parrot was silent. That same day, a notice was taped to her front door. Effective immediately, Karen Brewster is suspended from all HOA duties, pending investigation. Eli didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because while the HOA was in freefall, the damage on his farm remained. His crops were months from recovering. His animals were still uneasy. And Templeton, though clearly cornered, hadn't been disbarred. Yet, that night, as he and Abby walked the quiet field, Eli paused, there, in the moonlight, perched silently on the barn roof. Captain Pickles, alone staring, and then, in a soft, almost broken voice, the bird croaked, "Bad orders. Wrong man." Squawk. "Sorry, it wasn't mimicry. It was something else." By Friday morning, Rosewood Hills looked like a neighborhood waking from a long, strange nightmare. The HOA's legal office had shut down temporarily. Its hotline, once buzzing with anonymous complaints, had gone quiet, and Karen's prized support parrot, once the tyrant of rooftops, now sat quietly on her porch, untethered and oddly calm, as if he too knew the game was over. But Eli wasn't done yet. He and Abby arrived at the county courthouse, armed with more than evidence. They brought a letter, a formal request for restitution, itemizing every loss the farm had endured: destroyed crops, livestock trauma, cancelled contracts, drone repair, greenhouse sabotage, and the loss of seasonal income. The total, $42,739. And the check? It came faster than expected. Under pressure from state regulators, the Rosewood Hills HOA board offered a settlement to avoid litigation, but what caught everyone off guard was who delivered it, Karen. She showed up at the farm unannounced, dressed, not in her usual pastel pantsuit, but in plain jeans and an oversized sun hat. No cameras, no clipboard, no entourage, just her and Pickles. Eli stepped off the porch slowly, cautious. Abby watched from the doorway, one hand on her phone. Karen held out the envelope, hands shaking. Her eyes didn't meet his. The board voted without me, she said quietly. I'm not on it anymore. Not even allowed to attend meetings. Apparently, weaponized parrots violated 3 bylaws. Eli took the envelope but said nothing. I didn't know Templeton would take it that far. She went on. The tags, the fertilizer, the legal assault. He wasn't just using Pickles. He was using me. I thought I was clever, but I was just the bait. Eli raised an eyebrow. So you're the victim now. Karen flinched. No, I'm not asking for forgiveness, just stating the facts. Pickles hasn't spoken much since Templeton left. Not a word until last night. He just kept muttering, bad orders, bad orders. Like he knew. Pickles flapped once and landed on a fence post. For the first time in weeks, he didn't scream about violations or fines. He just whistled, soft and low, like a tune from another life. Karen nodded at the bird. He'll never be the same, she said. But maybe that's a good thing. She turned and walked off. No dramatic exit, no parting shot. Just a woman who had finally, truly lost the power she clung to for years. Eli opened the envelope later. Inside was the check, and a personal note, scribbled at the bottom, this land is yours. May it grow again. HOA Settlement Committee. It would cover the repairs, maybe even allow for an expansion. But Eli had one more surprise. 3 weeks later, with help from Abby, he launched a new initiative, Feathers for Good, a small sanctuary on the edge of his farm for displaced or mischievous birds in need of rehabilitation, funded partly by donations, partly by that very check. It was equal parts community project and subtle middle finger to the HOA and Pickles. He stayed, not in a cage, not as a pest, but as the sanctuary's first resident, still loud, still unpredictable, but somehow different, softer, like he'd finally found a purpose that didn't involve chaos and HOA bylaws. On the day they held the sanctuary's ribbon cutting, Eli gave a short speech to a crowd of neighbors, former foes among them. Some birds, he said, just need the right place to land. Pickles squawked once. Just one word. Home. The crowd erupted in laughter, but Eli just smiled. The parrot had ruined his farm once. Now he was helping rebuild it, and somewhere, miles away in a high-rise office, Gregory Templeton shredded his last consulting contract and finally realized you don't mess with a farmer or his land, especially not when the birds are watching.